This episode is sponsored by Postman. Postman is the world's leading API collaboration platform, and they just launched Postman AI Agent Builder, the quickest way to build AI agents. Start building at postman.com/podcast/Cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Once again, joined by our perpetual monthly co-host, Brandon Whichard from Software Defined Talk. Brandon, great to have you, man. How you been?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm fresh off the ski slopes of Utah. I'm recharged.
Nice.
I've spent some time in nature, so I'm ready to dive back into technology.
Nice. Where all did you go?
I went to the lovely Deer Valley, where, as I like to say, it's outside, but everything is manicured perfectly. So it's like they've perfected the outside. It's like the outside inside. You know, I don't really want the outdoors to be the real outdoors. I like it manicured, and that's what they did for me at Deer Valley.
No bears, no pumas, nothing like that.
Just beautiful restaurants, beautiful scenery. Everything's taken care of. You know, tissues on the runs. You know, like I said, I don't want to rough it. I'm not looking for any type of real outside behavior. I love it.
I like it. Well, listen, this is going to be a Cloud and AI News of the Month. We're going to be covering the things that happened in February, and as you know, as so has it, February is just a short month, so this one may end up being sort of a short show because I do feel like, to a certain extent, you know, we've got end of daylight savings is sort of coming up here pretty soon. You know, we're kind of coming out of the darkness, and I feel like the tech industry hasn't quite yet, kind of limbered up. They're not yet running. You know, folks are still kind of taking the after sales kickoff things. They're getting their numbers right. But before we get into that, we have to at least do a short sports minute. Football's done. Do you have a thing that replaces football in your sporting, just itch for the next 6 months? Is it NCAA basketball, or is there something else that replaces sports in your life that football doesn't do for now?
Sadly, I really don't. I've become like a tourist of many sports. Like, I will, of course, follow the NCAA tournament, but only after the bracket's out. I really have no idea what's going on, other than, the SEC's doing fairly well. I will not watch any baseball at all. I have no idea what's happening in that sport. I do tend to pick up to Formula One. I've after watching Drive to Survive several years ago, so I probably will watch several races. And then my son likes the MLS, and we have a team here in Austin. And I have absolutely no idea who any of the players are, but I enjoy going to the games and just cheering on because it's soccer. How complicated is it? Cheer for the goals. So I would say I kind of, if you will, downshift in my sporting behavior until football gets going in August.
Okay, well that's fair. It's a
What about you? You're a golf fan. You'll be gearing up for the Masters here, right?
Golf a little bit. For 1 week, watch the Masters, like you said. It's like it's outdoors, but it's perfect outdoors, so it's not really outdoors. And we'll do a little bit of that. I'm still, as somebody who sort of indirectly works for IBM, I'm still waiting for an invite from them. For helping out with something.
I'm sure it just got lost in the email. I'm sure that invite is well on its way. You're probably the only one trying to get in there. So
that's right. All right. So we're going to cover February. Last month when we did this, I feel like we spoke about 90% on DeepSeek. The world is now, DeepSeek plus 1 month. How do you feel? Has it had a lasting effect? Have you thought about it at all since last month? Where are you on the DeepSeek kind of spectrum?
Well, I think the theme for this month is sort of just instability, right? Like, everything just keeps changing across so many different factors. And I think when you sort of have like kind of instability, you just kind of end up with like everybody is unsure what to do. So I think DeepSeek is a good example. Like, we talked about that last week. Like, wow, it looks like they've cracked the code. Maybe models aren't so complicated to make. But then really all of that kind of fell down. It turns out that the models that they made actually were expensive to make, or at least more expensive than was maybe initially thought. So it's just, and I think, really what we're kind of coming at, and I think so much of our generation and those that kind of listen to this podcast, we're so conditioned to, like, we lived through 2000. We're like, oh, there's a bubble. Like, we're always just looking. We're like, is this the thing that falls out? And I think this sort of goes back to NVIDIA, where, it's really like every one of these questions is like, well, is the NVIDIA moat going to hold? Like, do people really need all these chips? And that's kind of think what we were talking about last month. And it's like, yeah, well, it seems like it has. And then, well, maybe we'll talk about CUDA. Does CUDA, like, I think you were talking about this on maybe the Software Defined Slack or somewhere else. Is like, is CUDA really going to hold? Do we really need that?
Right.
And are we going to really see demand? So I think it's just a lot of unknowns in February. So I think DeepSeek, I think is sort of like, was fun. I think we can we all think we learned there was like, people can make new models. Grok made a new model. I think it's fairly, if you have enough money, everyone can make a model. But at the same time, I don't think that's fundamentally changed anything. I think NVIDIA is still going to go strong, at least at the moment.
Right. Yeah, I think the interesting thing with NVIDIA at this point now is, they announced their earnings again. They were still insanely good. They did, basically $140 billion, up 93% year over year, which, like, let's put that in perspective. Amazon Web Services, which we think is the juggernaut of all juggernauts, did like $100 billion, maybe $110 billion run rate, but they're now at like 16% year over year. So, so the NVIDIA product managers are still living high off the hog, but it does feel a little bit like, the shine is off NVIDIA a little bit, just in terms of the stock price. Like, people are now sort of still like, I don't really understand what the DeepSeek thing did. Maybe the numbers weren't as we don't need NVIDIA as much as we did, but people still seem to be taking the Matt Ray approach of like, I'm sort of staying away from NVIDIA. The stock is sort of flattened out. It's still down a little bit, but it hasn't had a big rebound. Like, oops, you guys got it all wrong. Even though Jensen's told the world that they all got it wrong, and people are still buying tons of chips.
No, I think that's exactly right. But I think we should be careful there. It's like, it's one of these things to see the future. And I think we're all conditioned to be like, eventually someone will unravel NVIDIA. That can happen. Right. It could go a long time before that happens. Right. And it's like, like, if you're on the bull case, you're like, some people even say, even at these very rich valuations, when you do the math and you see that they're still, at enormous scale, they're growing 90%, that like there is some fundamental financial analysts out there that will say that the valuation is justified. If they keep doing this, like if next quarter or next year, we're having another conversation, like, well, they grew another 90%. At some point, it's just like, it is what it is. They continue to do well. So again, like, nobody knows. I think that's the theme of this February. To me, it's like, so much is happening. There's so many things that are happening. It's hard to know anything, but at least at the moment, it looks like NVIDIA is doing well.
Right. Well, and we're not gonna talk on this show. I guess we will a month from now. We'll talk about how all the tariffs that are being proposed or being implemented or being proposed to be implemented will impact some of this stuff. I think it'll be interesting because we've already seen in the late days of February, early days of March, we've seen some stuff around Apple pledging to bring a whole bunch of like chip development to the US. We've seen TSMC talk about that, but we'll dive into those next month. But yeah, I think we're going to start seeing a very deep intersection between like geopolitics and technology, which I know people don't love to talk about, but I think at least in the chip space, we're going to be dealing with quite a bit. Next thing I have on the list, and we're going to kind of bounce back and forth between our traditional kind of cloud news stuff and AI stuff and so forth. IBM completes the acquisition of Hashicorp, which I only highlight because it feels like it's been maybe like 15 months for, and I only put that in perspective because like we've now gone like a year and a half where every single day there's some announcement that somebody is getting like 10 to $100 billion. But like the regulatory agencies over a company that IBM is spending like, $6 billion on with like $150 million in revenue. But this took 18 months to get approved. But yet VCs are stroking checks for, $10 billion on a daily basis. Are you surprised that, Hashicorp, who, also couldn't really figure out how to monetize open source better than, anybody else, took this long to get officially approved?
I don't know, why. I guess I'd have to delve into more why. It doesn't really surprise me. I just felt like this was more like it just took a while to complete the paperwork. I don't think, I don't remember reading or hearing anything that there was like any type of major opposition to it. Now, I'm sure the people that worked on getting this clear to like, Brandon, you just trivialized like all the work we did for 18 months, which I understand, which is probably fair. But I'm just sort of like, I think to your point, right? It's funny to say this. It's a relatively small acquisition. Right. In the if only compared to everything else that's going on. it also is sort of like, I don't think anyone looks at it other than just like, yeah, it makes sense for IBM to buy it. IBM will be able to roll that into ELAs and offer it to its customers. It's just sort of like, it's kind of what IBM does and does pretty well. So I kind of look at it like, yeah, in fact, when you put this in the notes, like, I already thought this was approved. Like, I already moved on from this. Like, all the work has been done, but I was like, oh, it's officially approved. So good for them.
Right. Yeah. The flip side of it is IBM, I guess they're people who had finished their paperwork, felt like they needed something else to do. They acquired a company called DataStax, who's been around for a long time, is in the data space. So IBM, IBM feels like the one company right now that's doing a lot in the acquisition space, which is interesting. All the other ones feel like they're spending all their money on chips, and IBM is, like you said, sort of filling in the portfolio, any cracks and crevices.
But I think it's like the classic IBM. It's like why people hate and love IBM simultaneously. It's like they're just good at taking, companies that have well-known customer bases with a well-known product, and they're just going to fold it in. And it'll just become part of the machine. And then people will be like, I can't believe IBM just buys this stuff and resells it. And it's like, yeah, that's what they do. They do a really good job at that. So it's like, it is what it is. So I don't know. You call it a credit, call it a tax. It is what it is. I think they do it well.
Yeah. Another name that I didn't think we were going to talk about after we put Pat Gelsinger in our Hall of Shame, Intel filed some sort of like SEC filing. It was about kind of the larger organization since they're a public company. It appears they're naming a new CEO that will be in charge of the co-CEOs that got named when Pat left. Now, does this at all surprise you about Intel? Like, I've never seen sort of the triumvirate of CEOs. What could possibly cause this sort of thinking in terms of, like, we've talked about a lot of stuff. You've talked about a lot of stuff, org chart stuff on Software Defined Talk. Have you ever seen anything like this? And what could possibly convince the board that this is a good idea?
Well, one, it's been very complicated to understand which CEO is reporting to which CEO. That I never thought would be complicated, because it is.
Do you think they get numbers so people know who's who?
I guess
CEO 1, CEO 2.
Even at this moment, if you tell me, like, I'm not sure who's in charge of whom. But putting that aside, the only reason I think you do this is like you're setting it up to be split out, right? You're going to somehow create 3 companies here or 2 companies. So there's like one of them they said is the CEO of Intel products. So that's sort of like whatever that is, that's going to be like one thing that gets sold. And then there's going to be another thing that's probably gets sold that's like CEO of like fabs or whatever you want to call that, manufacturing.
Yeah.
And so from that respect, I guess it makes sense. I guess we're just watching a little bit of the sausage being made here and these regulatory filings, and it's just sort of coming out and it's confusing to everyone. But that's the only thing that makes any sense to me. Otherwise, they're just creating, it's the ultimate, like people talk about there's too much middle management. Like if you got 2 layers of CEOs or even 3, then you talk about confusion. Like that's just even more crazy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's either one of 2 things, because the rumor is that both Broadcom, so Broadcom is bidding to potentially buy out the product side of things, and TSMC is bidding to potentially buy out the fab side of things. So that would make complete logical sense. I don't know that you necessarily need a CEO after that, but that's fine. There's always people who kind of get the golden handcuffs or hand parachute, and we appreciate that. The only other thing I can think of is they didn't feel like they had enough strategy stuff after Pat left. Like there wasn't anybody who was able to create strategy documents at a fast enough pace. And they thought, well, it takes 3 CEOs to do what Pat used to do. That's the only 2 things I could think of.
I just feel for all the lower level employees. I can't imagine having 3 different CEOs. Like you're meeting with one on Monday, the next one on Wednesday. Think of all the pre-meetings. There must be like 700 pre-meetings for that meeting. And then you got to like not contradict yourself. Then if they're both in the room, you got to like, you cater to the one, but not the, I don't know. That's a very difficult, really, that's who should be getting the bonuses is the middle managers and directors have to go in there and present to all these people. That's got to be a difficult job now.
That's right. Speaking of CEOs, Docker announced a new CEO, which I was a little surprised. A gentleman named Don Johnson, not the Don Johnson that any of you are thinking about, but some other Don Johnson from Oracle Cloud, or formerly of Oracle Cloud. I didn't totally understand this one unless Scott Johnston's an interesting guy. He was like one of the early Docker people, and then Docker went through all of its remachinations and became Docker again. And he seemed to have done a pretty good job. He seemed to have gotten them to a level of, they were making money in the market. They were taking new rounds of funding. I can only guess that he was just like, I've reached as far as I can get as far as doing this. And this new guy is, I don't know if he's like, I can't imagine they're going to expand the portfolio because they sort of found their sweet spot. Maybe he's the guy who's going to spin them into Oracle or something. But I didn't see anything else other than just, they swapped out one Johnston for a Johnson as far as CEOs go. Any other guesses as to what Docker's doing here?
I had the same read. I actually think Scott Johnston, which I know we'll try to use their full names to keep it straight. Right. I mean, I think he deserves he needs some kind of award or something. Like I feel like Docker was on it's complete. I had completely written it off. Like they sold off, all the orchestration stuff, Docker Swarm. I was like, we'll never hear from this company again. I was just completely convinced. And it is, I don't know, best analogy is risen from the dead, right? I think Docker, the developer tools are as strong as ever. I think Docker is a great product. I bet many people listening to this still use it. It's great. People, I think they weren't afraid to go out and be like, you got to pay for it now, right? That's basic. Not to oversimplify the business strategy. It was like, it's like, there's some free tiers, but basically everyone's going to pay. And they had the little hiccup, I think, when they, whether they announced they were going to pull off the hosting or something along those lines, but they navigated that pretty well. So I think, this is sort of declare victory, sort of get out, go out on top. I think if you're Scott Johnston, you're like, I've done everything I could. I raised this company from the dead. It's super profitable. Turn it over to a new CEO. Maybe he sells it. Maybe he runs it. And then you go right off into the sunset and maybe go do something bigger. So I think, good job. This is a rare instance where you say you fixed it. You actually fixed the problems at Docker, and it's in a great state.
Yeah, I feel like he is number one on our list of people we'd love to have on the podcast. As soon as his whatever NDA period, where he's not really supposed to talk about it, I would love to have him on the show because he literally was there from the early Solomon days. I remember talking to him when I was an analyst, and he was trying to explain the product strategy to me. He went through everything. They were dead. They got spun out to some other company. They sold off all their assets. They came back. He figured out how to monetize open source, which most people can't. This guy, if he never does anything else as a tech CEO, which is fine. He could write Harvard Business Study things. He could be he could be a professor. He could be a consultant. He could pretty much do anything he wants at this point because he can point to these, the last 5 or 6 years and be like, show me somebody else who's done that. So
I think you already said it. Forget about all that. He needs to come on the Cloudcast and tell that story. That's exactly right. That's exactly. It'll be easy for him. He doesn't have to write a book. Just come on for an hour.
That's right.
Talk to Brian and tell all the stories. It'd be awesome.
That's right. Andy Jassy can tell us about day one at Amazon, AWS, and Scott can tell us about the flip side of.
Andy Jassy comes on. Andy Jassy is the final show of the Cloudcast. When and if he comes on, that's it.
That's right. Show 1000.
You end it there. That's how you go out. Mic drop.
That would be the bookends of a perfect. Yeah, exactly. A couple other things. Let's see. I do feel like there's some beloved things have gone away. So Microsoft shut down Skype, which just sort of no fanfare because I don't know that anybody's necessarily using Skype anymore. Did you guys ever use Skype as part of either Software Defined Talk or any of the previous podcasts that you used to use?
Of course. I speak for all podcasts. The entire podcast community is in debt to Skype and Call Recorder. For those that are heavily into the podcast minutia. That's how pretty much every podcast recorded, I would say, for maybe the first 5 or 7 years of actual podcasting. Yeah. So yeah, we definitely used it. It was always a love-hate relationship, but Skype is one of those things that's it did really make for what it was at the time. It was kind of revolutionary. The fact that you could call anyone, they even had phone numbers there for a while, and then it had a crazy corporate history. It was taken public, it went private, then sold to Microsoft. Never understand that acquisition, and then ultimately, I even used Skype for Business for a while at a company. Sure. So before it was replaced by Teams. So this is probably one of those things. I feel like it's maybe a quiet Hall of Fame kind of app. People will kind of complain about it, but I think it's contribution to both podcasting as well as sort of making phone calls to your friends in Europe. It was at the time, it was a good thing. Now we should contrast that with Chime, which is a product no one ever wanted, and I never liked to use it. So I don't know, Amazon Chime, and this is my long standing thing, right? All the Amazon executives talk about how they're obsessed with customers, right? And they went out and built a subpar conferencing thing that, as far as I can tell, kind of did everything you needed in conferencing, but did none of it well and was not fun to use. and no one really liked it. And the only people that really used it were the people at Amazon. So it's like, this is leading to your interview with Andy Jassy. This is the first question. Like, I don't understand what went wrong. You're so customer obsessed. How did you mess up video conferencing? So please ask that question when he comes on the show.
Yeah. And just to put it in context, because we kind of ripped through it. Amazon is no longer accepting new customers for Chime. So basically, without officially sort of saying like end of life, they're just like, no more. Like, we don't want anybody else to be burdened with this thing. We don't want to deal with it. Did you ever use Chime? The only time I ever used Chime, I interviewed for a job at AWS, I don't know, years and years ago. And so I used it like 5 or 6 times because I had to go through a million people, but like never used it for anything else. Never had an external customer analyst firm, anybody ever used Chime. Have you ever used Chime?
Yeah, only to meet with the Amazon, with my colleagues at AWS. They use it. It's fine. It's not like it was ever, it was never something like it had, like I said, it's sort of like, it's like the AWS console of like, it's just like, it kind of has everything, but it's not a really nice interface, and it's kind of wonky, and it has its own client. So I certainly have used it many times, but it is like, again, it's always back to that, like the AWS mantra. It's like, okay, this is like right after Jassy tells you how customer focused, and then you say, okay, well, what happened with Chime? Right? Like, I don't understand. Yeah. Like, if you did everything right with Chime, like, why are you shutting it down? And more importantly, why did you even build it to begin with? Like, why? Right, this is the other classic question. It's like, there were only like, I don't know, 7 million of these solutions when you probably built Chime. Like, why? Why did we need this?
Right. Yeah, it was almost like the product manager, and I don't know who it was, and I don't mean to offend them, but it's almost like the product manager had come over from, running the Amazon Basics division and was like, okay, I'm just going to build, here are the 5 features that everybody needs, and that's all we're building, and it's going to be essentially low cost or free, and we're going to go from there.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think that's the whole thing. It's like they just literally wrote down the 5 things you need. There is no differentiation there, right? Like, what was that 6-page memo? Talk about one-on-one out of the archives. Let's read that 6-page memo. Like, where was the press release? Today, people can talk to each other online. It's like, okay, I think we have that. What's the split do?
These are the leaks that we need, right? We need the leaking of that memo.
I want that entire memo. And I want to be everyone who was like, this is great. We're signing off on this.
I feel like, I do feel like, and I don't feel like we've seen as many lately, but for a while there, like, everybody had a leaky S3 bucket. Every company, it was always like, why didn't Amazon have one for like old 6-pagers? Like, somebody should just sort of slowly sneak those over there.
I want it. That's right. That should be a website, 6pagers.com, where it's just leaked Amazon 6-pager. I want to see the Fire Phone. I want to see Chime. There's a whole list of ones I want to see.
Who signed off on it? Eventually signed off on it. Yeah. Okay. So 2 last things. One is sort of fun, and then we'll get into one that I think has a little substance. HP adds 15 minutes of wait time for telephone support calls. Right. So instead of just saying like, hey, we'd prefer not to take your call, or people got upset about, getting somebody with the, slightly different dialect, they just built an artificial 15 minutes of wait time, I guess. And I'm assuming for 15 minutes, they're telling you that your call's important. I don't know if they're telling you to go use the online support, but like this goes in the same sort of bucket of 6-pagers. Like, who came up with this idea? Like, what was the process for being like, I know how we can fix our call center problem. We can make it like, this is the opposite of like customer obsessed. This is like, I hate my customer. I almost wonder if they have like a line item where they're like, okay, do we hate our customer enough? Have we done enough to run them off? Like, how does this happen? Other than like pure cost cutting, but even then, wouldn't you just shut down the service? Just like make the number unavailable?
Well, there does seem to be a number of ways that you would do this. Like, one, you would just be like, all you can do is call in and request that someone calls you back, and it could be several days, right? You're just like, hey, that's going to happen. But it's really interesting on these call center things, because I think I'm like, everyone has had to call in, and I think the mistake sometimes I make is like when I pick up a phone and I'm calling you, it means I have exhausted every possible online version of doing this. Like, I'm only calling you because there's nothing left for me to do. So when they say like, you can go online, it's like, trust me, I've been online. I've tried every possible way. I don't want to be on the phone either. But to be sympathetic, I guess, is sort of like, there must be a huge group, and I don't know what they're calling about, printers. I don't know what's going on, where just people are just calling and inundating with like the FAQ question. Like, it's just a classic, it's not working. Well, is it plugged in? That kind of thing. So I don't know. Like, it is, it's almost to the point of like, it came out of a reputable source, so I don't question it, but it's almost like we almost need to see like, is this actually true? Did this actually, that's kind of how it rings true to me, to a point of like, is this really even what someone do? Because like, to your point, like turn off the line, only allow callbacks, only allow online chat. There's a million ways to do it. So I don't know. I don't know how any of this gets through.
And nobody wants to spend the 15 minutes to see if this is actually true or not. But they're just, they're like, well, it was on the internet.
Maybe we should do a podcast where we're just like, we literally call in and we'll just talk for 15 minutes to see if someone, and we'll just be like, wow, I can't believe you answered the phone. Did you really wait 15 minutes to pick up the line? That'd be an awesome podcast.
You just talk to them for a while. How you doing? How are
interview them. Like, are people really mad after waiting 15 minutes, or they're like, what do you tell them? What are the questions? It would be kind of fun.
It's got to be mostly printer stuff, right? Like the printer just doesn't work, the ink doesn't work.
And maybe this is just a sign that none of us should have printers. It's like the kids, they just don't have printers. I'm like, I still have a printer, but maybe this is a sign that we just throw them all out. And we're like, that's it. We just can't print anymore. That's how it is.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Last topic. And this one I feel like is kind of a real topic. What's your relationship? Because I know you are at least a hobbyist developer. You write some code for various stuff. Like, what's your relationship with sort of AI tools for developers, whether it's code assistants or whatever it might be? I've heard you talk about things like Cursor before, but like, what's your general relationship with them at this point? Nothing new that hasn't been said before, but like, I encourage everyone, even if you're just a part-time, if you had one computer science class or just a hobbyist programmer, download Cursor or your favorite IDE with like one of these co-pilots and just build yourself a little app. Anything. It can be anything. And it is just mind-blowing, like how much that these things can do. And I saw Anthropic even released yet another version that's even better. You can do it all from the command line, just tell it what you want to do. So I think if there's any skeptic about AI out there, it's like, I think software development is, has already been revolutionized. So almost to the point of, if you have like, I think, getting a computer science degree, maybe for the last 2 decades, has been like a pretty easy call. Like, I'll get a computer science degree, I'll get a good job doing something, right? Yep, and I think that is fundamentally changed, right? The fact that like these tools can so quickly, even the best of the best, right? I'm talking about any level of developer can benefit from doing one of these things. So that is probably, and I think it's probably the best use case for AI today. So I think for sure, software development has already been changed. Like, this is the one place where I see people say something like, in a year, 3 years, 5 years, no one will be writing code. It'll just kind of be like a review, right? You'll just kind of review what's going on and check it in. I totally believe that. So I think of all the AI promises, writing source code, and of course, proofreading my emails. That's the other one. Sure. Yeah, of course. Those use cases are for sure already here, and we're never going back. Yeah. I feel like that's the universal, well, I shouldn't say that. I feel like there's sort of two types of developers, at least that I've talked to. One is the one that sounds exactly like you, which is like, I love it. It's a great assistant. It helps you do all sorts of stuff. It learns things. And then there's the ones who like are, and you don't take it as like, it's going to take my job, because obviously like it's not your full-time job. Like, do you find in talking to people that it's their full-time job that they have a very different opinion about it, in terms of they're very hesitant to fall in love with it, because the more they fall in love with it, the more they question their value add to the whole process?
Well, I think for sure, like I don't think there's any going back to like if you take whatever, a team of 10 and you give them this, like, a team of 5 can probably, if you will, write things as fast. Now, the hard part though is like figuring out what to build, right? And then figuring out how to integrate these things. So like, there's still going to be, it's so helpful for like the individual productivity. Now, I think the question is sort of like, well, how do we bring all of this stuff together? And I think I think it was more like the world is, what we think about today is as a traditional computer science, like you got to sit down and write a for loop, got to write a while, it's like all that work's going to be taken from you. That kind of just boring kind of grunt work. And you can even say it's like for a long time, code completion tools have been doing a lot of that already, but you kind of had to be a little bit more hands-on. So I think now it's just going to become like everyone becomes an editor, right? You're looking at it, you're making sure the functional tests are doing it. Now, what you may find though is like some people just love that act of like writing, it's like authors, right? They just love writing, right? And so those people, I think maybe will have a problem. I think for the rest of us, right, it's sort of like, oh, this is great. I don't even have to really learn the Python's syntax. Or like I was even talking about like, and with everyone listening to this, it's like, probably many people are using Macs, right? Or is some type of Linux. Yep. It's like, oh, it's so great. Like, we're all experts at the Unix command line. You can just say like, write me a command line thing to do that finds all the files that look like this, that does this, and delete them, right? And it's like, oh, like I would have had to look that up. It would have taken me like 30, 40 minutes. I probably wouldn't have done it, right? Now you can immediately get those things. So I just think of it's like, yeah, I mean, I would definitely, and I do have a future high schooler. I once thought like, oh, technology would be a good way to go. But I think it's more like, no, like everyone's going to know how to code, right? Everyone's going to have these tools. So you got to get like get your degree in something else and just like writing. It's like everyone has to write. Right. So get your degree in something else and then just use this as a tool. But I don't know, to me, that seems like a good thing. It's like, I don't know. Did anyone really want to write all these for loops? Did we really want to do all this? I mean, it's like at some point, it's just like, it's kind of a lot of grunt work inside of that.
Yeah. And I only bring this up because there's a couple of good articles that were that we highlighted this week. One of them was from our friends over at Red Monk. I think Stephen O'Grady wrote a huge, good writer, very good writer. But basically, his thing was these things are very popular, but at least over the last 3 or 4 years, like the most popular one has like significantly shifted. So it shifted from originally being like ChatGPT by itself, then it became GitHub Copilot, and then it became like Cursor, and now there's like, son of Cursor, and we're seeing forks of what the underlying. So it was interesting, because obviously Red Monk does a very good job of sort of tracking, projects and developer tools and all this stuff. But in essence, it was like, don't get too comfortable with one because the sort of state of the art is changing really quickly, which is fine. That happens in new markets. I think the other piece that's going to start getting really interesting is like who's measuring success and what are they measuring for? Because I think your explanation was very good in terms of saying like, look, at the individual level, I look at this thing as being, net positive for myself, and it helps me do things and I do them faster and I don't have to remember certain things. And I wonder if those sort of things, like how they bubble up, because I do end up seeing, certain CEOs and CIOs and CTOs and so forth starting to poo-poo this stuff a little bit and being like, I've only seen this much benefit so much. I've seen 10% of our codes getting written or, 5% or 8% or whatever it is. And so I think there's going to be a certain kind of tension that's going to start happening between like, how are you telling me that you're better versus like, could that thing replace you? And I think that's going to be sort of the eternal question around AI. But I do feel like because developer assistance is now such a well-defined space, of all the things that you can do with generative AI, like it feels like the most well-defined and the thing that's getting the best results of it, that I feel like it's going to quickly kind of come under, I don't want to say under fire, but kind of under the microscope of like, what are we getting out of this? Like, what did we think we were going to get out of it? Like, is it productivity? Is it cost savings? Is it some combination of them? And I think it's going to be interesting to watch developers kind of be in the crosshairs because they've sat there for a long time and kind of wanted to talk about them being 10x developers, but at the same time, they never really wanted you to have a definitive thing to measure that. Like, don't measure me by lines of code. I want to be paid as if I'm super awesome, but I don't really want to have a measurement of accountability for it. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, but like, I think we're going to start kind of getting back into some of those conversations again, because AI is at the crosshairs of like replacement or augmentation. And I don't know if people know what the right answer to that is.
Well, I think what we're about to learn here is something like I think we've all known for a while, but I think it's just going to be more highlighted. It's like, I bet you there's a ton of developers listening to this right now. And it's like, okay, of your current day, like how much time in your current day are you sitting down writing code, right? And I think what we would find is be like, well, it's not as much as we would think. It's not like most developers are sitting down for 8 hours and just writing code. It's like they're going to meetings, they're meeting with the product managers, they're doing testing, they're doing just all the, corporate bureaucracy that we live in. And I think this is just where business is today, right? And I think AI in some ways is just highlighting all of these things. It's like, oh, well, it turns out as a collection of people, we talk about these specific, or like writing is a good example, content marketing, right? Writing content. How often do people don't usually sit down and write for 8 hours straight. They have a lot of other things to do in their job, right? And I think what we're just learning, and this is kind of like a reflection back to executives, is like, hey, there's a lot that goes on inside this business. There's just a lot of like weird communication that like kind of back to what I was saying, the whole podcast is like, there's just a lot of unknowns, right? This is about even to touch on the RTO a little bit. It's like, we don't know how this business runs when we get down to it. There's lots of stuff that happens, but there's a lot of cross communication and things happening. And I think that's all this is going to highlight. And so like, so all the executives will be like, I don't understand why we need developers anymore. Like, they don't have to write the code before it. Well, it turns out they were doing a lot more. And it turns out there's a lot of other things that happen. So I think that's what will be go forward. But I will say, just kind of reiterate what I said before, just like you've probably used all these tools to proofread an email for you. Definitely sit down and just be like, hey, I want a little Python program to do whatever, right? You'll be amazed how quickly you can do it. And even back to Docker, it's like, I like Docker even more because I don't even have to know the commands. Like, create me a Docker file that does this. Great. It all just happens for me. So it's great. Like, I think maybe to leave it here, it's just great. Like, you can have the ideas, but you don't have to dive into the minutia, right? That's what's great for human beings. So that's the most optimistic view of at least the tools that I've used lately.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Well, listen, let's wrap it up there. I didn't think we were actually going to go this long, but we lots of good stuff to talk about, more than I expected. By the time we do this again next month, the March Madness tournament will mostly be over. So do you want to make a totally blind pick for who might win it, knowing nothing about the brackets or anything like that, just so we can come back and double check you?
100%. Put all your money on University of Tennessee. They're going all the way this year. This is the year they win it all. So you can thank me. Thank me next month. Place your bets now.
There you go. Brandon Whichard, Tennessee is a basketball school. We've heard it here. I like it. All right. With that, folks, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you to Brandon, as always, for helping us out on Cloud and AI News of the Month. Aaron will be back. Aaron, as I was talking to Brandon, has just sort of taken over the Wednesday show. It looks like he's going to be doing those a lot. Whether you like it or not, Aaron is going to take over that. I think he's doing a good job of it. He's got a lot of interesting guests lined up. So with that, we want to thank Brandon. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend, and we'll wrap it up, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.